Now we're going to get started with the specific questions that we have for the evening. And our first set of questions will be three questions, two regarding the coronavirus and one regarding urban agriculture. And the first question will be addressed to Alex Padro, Jeanné Lewis, Kathy Henderson, and Markus Batchelor. And that question is about slaughterhouses. Now, we don't have slaughterhouses in DC, but since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, meat processing centers have been a hotbed of cases. The workers, who are often low-paid immigrants and people of color, have cited a lack of protective equipment and conditions that put them at high risk of exposure. There are no slaughterhouses in DC, but what would you have our jurisdiction do in solidarity with these workers? And the first candidate is Alex Padro.
Thank you. Interesting question, since it doesn't directly affect us, because we don't have any of those types of businesses in our jurisdiction. But nonetheless, if we do obviously have many businesses that employ immigrants that need PPE in order to be able to prepare the food that are the byproducts of the slaughterhouses that we're referring to. So I think I would like to concentrate my efforts and my activity in terms of trying to address that pandemic and its effect on animals in that direction. So definitely we've made some strides in terms of providing free PPE for food service employers, but we can certainly do much more to ensure that that everyone that has the need for PPE in order to maintain their own safety and the safety of the customers that they deal with, should be provided at no charge by the employers.
Thank you, Alex. Jeanné Lewis.
I think it's an excellent question because it shows how connected we are, even though we don't have slaughterhouses in DC. So as councilwoman, the first thing I would do is leverage relationships that I have with national nonprofit organizations like Jobs with Justice, who advocate for worker rights, particularly low-paid workers and workers who are in fact affected by the problem that you described, and talk with them about how I could leverage my my political credibility to lend my voice and actually help advocate for those workers. And I think those organizations also have recommendations about how businesses in DC who are connected to those slaughterhouses can advance an equity agenda. So that's where I would start.
Thank you. Kathy Henderson? Yes, and you have 50 seconds.
Okay, we don't have a slaughterhouse in DC, but the issue did come up for our regional partner in Virginia. If you've watched one of those videos, you can see that it's just really tragic. I would certainly use my position on the DC Council to advocate for moving away from slaughterhouses and eating meat. It's really tragic. We have to support workers, and we have to support workers in viable careers. And too often slaughterhouses end up being dead-end jobs for people with low wages, and it's just really abusive for our animal friends. So I think we need to move away from slaughterhouses and use all of our educational resources to inform people about other choices, meatless choices. And that's something I'm certainly committed to, and I look forward to sharing that with our residents in the district and moving forward with supporting our regional partners. And that includes other states.
Right. Thank you, Kathy. Markus Batchelor?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kishan. So obviously, I agree that I think, for our workers directly affected by the specific issue, we need somebody on the council. who's willing not just to be a citywide leader, but a regional and national leader on these issues. And my career and my work in progressive politics across the country, I think, lends me that experience. I'll just say, though, as the nephew of a 70-year-old meatpacker who's worked at Safeway for 40 years, who still goes to work every day, and the son of a home health aide who's still showing up in service to our neighbors, I understand very directly the need for our frontline workers to get the support that they need. My mom pays for PPE out of pocket, doesn't have the type of protections or, quite frankly, the salary she deserves. And my uncle, who obviously has a higher health risk, needs that support as well. So I'll be in support of making sure that we require businesses to provide PPE for its employees, and that government support folks in that work.
Thank you, Markus. Thank you. All right, the next four questions, the next four candidates will get a different question. And those candidates will be Franklin Garcia, Christina Henderson, Markus Goodwin, and Mónica Palacio. This question is about urban agriculture. And the question is, it's not enough to be against problems. We need to also create solutions. What are your thoughts on how to support DC's urban agriculture businesses and nonprofits? And first will be Franklin Garcia. For 50 seconds.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, I am very excited about this. You know, one of the things that we can always do is engage nonprofits. And I remember a couple of years ago, there was a nonprofit called Community Connections that created a project called Youth Blossom. And what they did is they had young people go to backyards of people throughout the city and create farms, educate people how they can create farms. And then that farming would then be taken to community restaurants so they can make a profit. And not only showed young people how to consistently do a task and engage them in farming, which is unusual for a big city, but it also created involvement in the community. There's so many different ways that we can go ahead and be creative in ensuring that we not only support our farming industry, but that we also engage our community, and that we're doing all we can to make sure that people understand the need to continue to engage in farming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got next Christina Henderson.
Great, thanks for that question. So when I was a staffer at the DC Council, I drafted and helped pass the DC Urban Farming and Agriculture Bill back in 2014. And this was a bill to push the DC government to utilize open space to provide to nonprofit organizations so that they can develop community gardens. Because we know for a lot of folks who want to engage in DC urban farming and agriculture in DC, space is at a premium and it's not always available. But we do have open lots and things like that where we can foster that. As a council member, I'd like to build upon that, specifically looking to ensure how has the program been working, but also another part of that was around providing tax credits for businesses that are working with urban farmers, and then also, working with food banks in particular to help in terms of food security and handling our food desert issue that we have in DC. And so as a council member, I'd look to build upon that work that was started several years ago. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I don't know if we have Markus Goodwin with us to take this question, but he would be next if he's here. Markus Goodwin, are you there? If not, we'll move on to Mónica Palacio.
Thank you. Yes. Well, having grown up in New York City, urban farming was a very foreign concept to a, immigrant Latina girl on the Lower East Side. But having come to DC, I can truly appreciate the urban spaces and the green spaces we have here. I've noticed a boom over the last 30 years in community gardens, in people growing their own food, and even during COVID. And I think that that can be a very creative solution to some of our food deserts. We need to support local businesses so they can expand and provide the fresh greens and produce we need locally. I don't think we need trucks from Maryland and Virginia coming in every day, bringing, tomatoes and fruits and vegetables to the city. We can grow those fruits here for ourselves. I think it's better sustainability policy. And I think that those investments go a long way, not just in the short term, but in the long term.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. Okay, great. Now I'm going to turn to Max Broad for the last question that will go to Chander Jayaraman, then Ed Lazere, then Michangelo Scruggs, then Claudia Barragan, and lastly, we have Vincent Orange joining us as well. Max, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Kishan. And this question is similar to the slaughterhouse, but we're thinking a lot about the intersections with other movements, and what's happening in outside of DC that still pertains to us. With what the products that are coming into DC and the public health concerns. So as we all know, the pandemic has increased public awareness around live animal markets and how they can transmit diseases. These are often called wet markets, and they're called that because the floors are constantly washed to clean the remains of butchered animals. And as such, live animal markets are a hotbed for disease transmission. The exchange of bodily fluids between animals confined in tight spaces and open air butchering facilitates transmission between species. Wet markets are not unique to Wuhan, China, where the coronavirus originated. They're present throughout the United States. Are there ways that this knowledge is relevant to public health in DC? And what should we do about it? And as Kishan said, we'll start with Chander Jayaraman, go to Ed Lazere, Michangelo Scruggs, Claudia Barragan, and then we had Vincent Orange joining us, who's also a candidate for at-large. We'll go last. So Chander Jayaraman.
Thank you. That's an excellent pronunciation of my name. I think wet markets you are correct, that just the idea of putting all these animals into these cages and packing them in, and it's almost like a twisted show of like why you slaughter them in front of people. I think it just should be outlawed. I don't think it makes sense. It's very unhygienic. There is none of the protections that you would normally want with food that we've actually fought so long to establish through the USDA to make sure our food's safe. You can just see right now the number of cases that seems to have grown exponentially of different viruses that grow on not only plants and animals. And so everything we can do to protect our residents from meat products that are contaminated, that are left open, that are held in unsanitary conditions, have no place in certainly in DC or in other areas. So that's what I would put forward, that we outlaw it altogether.
Thank you, Ed Lazere.
Thanks, Max. So I'll be honest, I wasn't 100% sure where you were going with that question. Is it whether what we think about wet markets in other communities? Is that what your question is, or just how does this apply to DC in a more general way?
Yeah, it's a good question, and public health is obviously a concern. This is a public health crisis for all of us as we face the pandemic. And DC, do we need to be proactive about preventing zoonotic diseases either within the boundaries of the district or from foods that the district imports?
Oh, well, sure, absolutely. I mean, I just think in general, the pandemic is a really powerful reminder of how important public health is in general for all of us, and just having really strict regulations around public health, particularly not just for consumers, but for the workers there as well. And I mean, honestly, I think more about the district and making sure that we are reopening the city safely. That may include making sure that we're prohibiting purchase of foods that come from wet markets. But honestly, I guess I just would be more focused on what are we doing within the district to protect workers and consumers. So thinking about the fact that we probably shouldn't have bars and restaurants open right now, so that we can get the virus slowed down, and so that we can make sure that we can open schools faster than we're able to now. And thinking about making sure that every single worker who's at risk of coronavirus is allowed to collect unemployment insurance rather than going to work and putting their health at risk. And making sure that every single person who works in the district has a right to PPE and legal protections against retaliation if indeed their employer forces them to come to work or doesn't provide adequate PPE.
Thank you, Ed. And next we have Dr. Mick.
So the way that I would handle it, first of all, DC would need to redefine their policies and procedures that coincide with USDA policies and procedures, and make sure that our distributors are getting or bringing food from reputable slaughterhouses that are following the rules. And when they're not, we need to discourage those distributors from being able or from selling those foods to markets here in the district. And that's what I would do as councilman. I would ensure that we were doing what we were supposed to do in terms of making sure that our people are safe by restricting distributors from bringing contaminated food into the district.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mick. And Claudia Barragan.
Great. Thank you so much for explaining the question a little bit more. So as an immigrant, I come from Bolivia, South America, the middle. We're a landlocked country. Growing up, I didn't necessarily eat a lot of meat. My country is actually one of the few countries that has these wet markets. In fact, the World Health Organization established a lot of healthy markets. And it's not even, an organization like that to establish them. That's just within our culture, within our heritage for thousands of years that we've done that, right? So the idea that most developing countries, like most underdeveloped countries are doing this is also kind of skewed. We have to learn from countries like mine because our diets are different, right? So the consumer part of it makes a big difference, right? Our role in this is important. Our daily role in this is really important. So understanding, going back to our own heritage and really understanding how we eat. But I really wanted to talk about the connection between public health and DOH, because I think your question is really important in terms of COVID and what we've seen in terms of the city agencies. And COVID has taught us that DOH lacked resources to address issues in the city, right? They don't necessarily have the capacity to monitor outbreaks. And how can we assume that they will be able to monitor something like this?
Thank you.
Right, that's really important. The other one is lack of understanding of connections between animal welfare.
Thank you, Claudia.
So that's the other thing that they don't do. So I really want to make sure that we're focusing on agencies like DOH in this. Thank you.
And lastly, before we go to Vincent Orange, I just want to flag for everybody that we have another poll up that you are welcome to weigh in on now about zoonotic diseases. We have 17 responses already. And next, Vincent Orange.
I think he left. He must not think you guys are important.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move on. And we are, all right, so we just talked a lot about where the animal, a lot about slaughterhouses and public health. We're gonna move now to birds and talk about bird-friendly buildings. And with that,
I can take it.
Great,
Mac, it sounds like you've got some wind chimes going in the background there. Wish I was where you were. Looks nice. All right. Well, anyway, as Max was mentioning, every year migratory birds pass through the district, and the city has a booming bird watching community. However, many birds die from colliding with buildings, as is cataloged by the DC Wildlife Lights Out DC count. Some of these birds simply don't see the glass, and others, those with eyes on the sides of their heads, they have difficulty with depth perception. The American Bird Conservancy states that bird-friendly buildings can be designed without adding to the cost of construction. So the question to all of you is, what should DC do to diminish the many birds that die within our borders every year, especially when it comes to collisions with buildings? And we'll do 30 seconds per person here. And it looks like we are starting with Ed Lazere.
Great. Well, one of my fun DC experiences was going out with my neighborhood, Ann Anderson, in December to be part of the Audubon bird count. And I'm really sad that climate change is also making it less likely that birds will be migrating through any. So part of what I want to do is fight climate change so that we can continue to have birds that come and go in winter and summer. But I mean, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. If there's no added cost, we just need to pass legislation mandating that any new building that's built in the city or any building that's replacing its windows has to use bird-safe glass. Let's just protect the birds. And any way that we universal design, where we're designing things that work for everybody, whether it's buildings and glass and birds or others, I think as a city we need to work for that kind of universal design whenever we can.
Thank you. Next up is Mónica Palacio.
I have to start by saying that I've never appreciated the sound of birds in this city so much as I have this year. It's reassuring and calming. And when I'm on the phone with people in other cities, they're like, what is going on in your backyard? But I agree that we need to pass stronger and more aggressive legislation so that new buildings and old buildings have the bird safe glass so that the birds are not, we're not having these catastrophic events with the birds flying into glass. And as a young girl, I had 2 parakeets, and I remember always closing the blinds to make sure the birds were safe. But there's so much to say about this, but I think we need more aggressive legislation around bird safety.
Great. All right. Next is Jeanné Lewis, then Chander Jayaraman, then Alex Padro, Kathy Henderson, Markus Batchelor, Christina Henderson, Michangelo Scruggs, Claudia Barragan, and Franklin Garcia. So Marcus Goodwin, you're not, oh, sorry, Marcus Goodwin is probably not here, right? Then it's Jeanné Lewis, please.
Great, thank you. So my grandmother had birds, actually, some very small birds. And I remember being a kid and I used to wonder why they were singing all the time. But I'll say that since COVID being home, I've discovered that I actually have hummingbirds in my yard. And I did not know that we had hummingbirds in Washington, D.C. until I was home during this crisis. So I agree that we do need to pass more aggressive legislation. And I think that we can be creative about leveraging that legislation to create jobs and also training for D.C. residents. So not only new construction and upgraded buildings, but also looking at our public housing. Our public housing drastically needs improvement and repair. And I think that making all of our public housing more environmentally friendly, including bird safe glass, is a great place to spend our resources right now to support both our residents and also support migratory birds.
Thank you, Jeanné. Chander?
Thank you so much for the question. I think we need to just take a common sense approach to it. If the net costs are zero, it's common sense to say, buildings should use bird safe glass. However, there are lots of buildings that have already been built that would not be covered by that. And so if a bird does strike a building, I think that's where, we can do the right thing and ask building owners to make sure they call the right agency to come take care of the bird and take it to the Humane Society and treat them. And hopefully we won't be losing any migratory birds because of climate change, but I know it's happening. And, again, a common sense approach. If it's a net zero, let's just do it.
Thank you, Chander. Thank you. Alex Padro?
The building codes determine what types of materials need to be used in new construction. So by updating the building codes to ensure the use of bird safe glass, any new construction would be required to meet that requirement. But also we could come up with financial incentives for owners of existing buildings to retrofit their windows so that they would be using bird safe glass. Those would be my 2 recommendations.
Thank you, Alex. Kathy Henderson?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm a member of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City, And we've been talking about minimizing bird strikes for quite some time. And every time I've been a part of any conversation about LEED certification, I always bring up the issue of minimizing bird strikes. And I would certainly welcome the opportunity as your at-large council member to strengthen protections for our birds. And I will say this to Ms. Lewis, I will share my hummingbird videos with you. They are migratory birds. The beauty of planting hummingbird vines for them and other plants is just wonderful. So anything that we can do as a city to protect our bird friends is a welcome opportunity. And boy, I can't wait to enter that fight to increase awareness. This is just such a vital topic, and I'm really glad that we're having this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
And
Markus,
yes, please share those hummingbird videos. We want to see them too.
absolutely. Markus Batchelor is next.
Yeah, no, thank you. For sure, I'm in full support of making sure that we require both bird safe glass, but also bird safe building design on new builds, and would also be open to incentives for retrofitting. I'll also say, as somebody who experiences firsthand kind of the low end of our city's inequity around tree canopy, I know it's also about creating better environments for our wildlife that both call our space here in the city home permanently and also our migratory bird population. And so I'd also be hyper focused on making sure that we build up our tree canopy, which obviously has a net benefit for birds and bird watchers, but also has a tremendous impact on the human occupants of communities. When you talk about heat islands and climate resiliency, those are things we've also got to focus on as well. And in my experience working in district government, I worked with urban forestry at DDOT pretty frequently to make sure, and obviously organizations that also do that work on the ground to make sure that we build the tree canopy that'll keep our city resilient and beautiful and home to all the animals who call it home.
Thank you, Markus. Christina Henderson.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I agree that I feel like we need to pass legislation to update the building codes around bird safe glass, but also I would be open to providing financial incentive for existing buildings and businesses to retrofit, as they retrofit and modernize, to do so as well. I think in that conversation, though, we also have to take into account the federal government, who owns a lot of buildings in DC that have glass exteriors, in terms of how do we work with our federal partners to ensure that they're participating in the process as well. And like others have said, in terms of, how do we use this to address the overall issues of climate change in terms of birds coming to the area? Thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right. On this question, next we have Michangelo Scruggs, Dr. Mick, and then Claudia Barragan and Franklin Garcia. Dr. Mick.
So I certainly agree that we need to update legislation around the modernization of buildings using the bird-free or the bird glass, or glass that will not kill our birds, okay? And also using tax incentive for retrofitting. But I also think we need to work with bird experts to figure out what other ways we can help to save our birds from having collision or calamity as well, and form policies and enact laws around that.
Thank you. Claudia?
Great, thank you. Yes, bird safe legislation is long overdue, and especially well-informed legislature. So as an urban planner, what I would do is I would contact architects, especially architects of color, because they're actually there, to develop solutions to address this issue. My husband, a Latino architect, for example, he gave me this really good solution about ensuring that sensors lighting sensors are in place and that they are included in the permitting process. That way we can ensure that at least that easy solution is established, because ultimately bird safe glass is very expensive. And we need to understand the legislature is also about costs. So when we're making this really important legislature to include bird safe glasses, we also need to include other solutions as well, so that we're really making an impact here. And there's plenty of architects, and especially architects of color, who want to be involved in this. We just need to get their voice in the room, and we need to contact those who know about this so that they can also be advocates for this. So that's my solution, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We really appreciate it. Franklin Garcia, you're the last candidate on this one.
Thank you so much. And being the last, not sure that I have much more to add. I certainly agree with most of what has been said. If it is doesn't cost anything, it's obviously common sense to ask that our building code be updated. I also think that one of the beauties of this is that we can make, by this forum, we can make other people aware of issues that non-animal people understand that's going on. And so that's why I advocate for representation. It is so important. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how robust of a bird watching community we have here in the city. But we know that now because you've got advocacy for them right here. That's exactly what I'm trying to do by advocating for Latino inclusion in the DC Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, y'all get to hear my chimes for a little bit as the wind picks up. So y'all, we're gonna do something a little different. As I mentioned, we have a lot of candidates on the webinar and a lot of candidates running. So we had to find some ways to make the forum work so everybody got some airtime. And what we're doing is showing videos. We invited the candidates to submit videos that are pertinent to sorry, one second. Candidates that are, or videos that are pertinent to different animal issues. And as part of that, we are we have 2 sets of videos to show people, and let me just make sure I have the video queued up on the it looks like Zoom is not allowing this video to be shared, so I'm going to troubleshoot that. And
okay,
will you go to the next question?
Sure. No problem. Thanks everyone for your answers thus far. We have one more longer form question, and then we'll have short answer questions since we're getting later into the evening. But this next question is about making DC a more vegetarian-friendly city. In 2010, DC was actually identified as the most veggie-friendly city in the entire country by PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. That was the same year that the DC Council voted on a resolution called the Meatless Monday Resolution. Now, the question for a few of you is, what would you do to expand that, to make DC, once again, the best in the country for not just vegetarians and vegans, but also what we call reducitarians, people who would like to reduce their consumption of meat, especially in light of all the studies showing the impact on our climate from the emissions due to meat and meat production. So the candidate order for that question is Mónica Palacio, Franklin Garcia, Chander Jayaraman, Ed Lazere, Alex Padro, and Claudia Barragan. Please proceed, Mónica.
Thank you. Yes, I do think that DC is still in the top 10, if I'm not mistaken, of vegetarian-friendly cities. I want to focus on affordability of vegetarian options. I've noticed that we have more and more high-end supermarkets that are organic and vegetarian, more high-end restaurants that are vegetarian. We need to support local businesses so that they're able to provide more accessible vegetarian options to broader parts of the city. So that it's not just, boutique restaurants on Connecticut Avenue or DuPont Circle or downtown, but let's support local businesses so that they're able to provide these vegetarian-friendly options, and also provide education around the benefits and advantages so that more people have information and access to these vegetarian options.
Thank you. Next is Franklin Garcia.
Okay, okay, yes. You know, I've been a vegetarian for some 30 years, and I remember the first time when I started it, I went home and my mother said, because she had to make special cooking for me, she said, why couldn't you take on something else like smoking or drinking like everybody else does? Why do you have to do this? And you know, and it's a cultural thing, right? And so I'm thinking that if we start early on, that's the way to do it. I mean, I still remember back in the days, when I used to go, there used to be a store by DuPont Circle. I think it was called Naturally Yours or something on that line. And it was so tough to be a vegetarian because everything was so expensive and you have to drive to a specific places. Nowadays, it's so much more convenient. So in some ways it's affordable, but we need to instill values in our kids and start early, you know, go to the schools and make a one-day vegetarian meal for across all schools. And you know, it's the healthy choice. It's the right thing to do. So I don't think you have a lot of hesitation for people engaging in that. I think that it's just a cultural thing. We need to start early and getting people started. And a lot of us who started long time ago had a tough time. Now it's so much easier to do.
Thank you, Franklin. That's right. Chander, you're next.
Thank you for that question. Being born in India, I grew up vegetarian. I still, cook a lot of my father's famous recipes of South Indian food and love it. And I try and have at least multiple days where I don't eat anything but vegetarian food and things like turmeric and cumin and that we use that's found to be healthy. And so I think it is a healthy choice that we need to continue to pursue. Although I still see there's not as many pure vegetarian restaurants as there could be. And I'm hoping that as more people demand it and want it, and we'll have more of them. I personally would love to start my own Indian restaurant someday, a vegetarian restaurant right here in DC. So thank you.
Well, we hope you do. Thanks. Next up is Ed Lazere.
Great. Well, as I said, I've been a vegetarian since my early 20s, and I made that choice because I just couldn't accept that an animal should suffer for my pleasure, and that I should find another way to do it. And I distinctly remember for when you're first a vegetarian, you look at your plate, it feels like a big empty hole when meat's not there, and you're trying to figure out how to replace it. And I do think that's really a common challenge for a lot of other people, is just imagining a meal without meat. So I think we just need to help people fill in that imagination, and that could start with having schools offer vegetarian options, or even having school meals include some days entirely vegetarian options, and not simply a burrito filled with, refried beans or something that is a lame vegetarian meal, but a really tasty, really well done, creative vegetarian meal could include just doing much more gardening within our schools, and then having the kids bring the food that they grow into the kitchen and cook it. And of course, what's better than growing your own food, cooking it, and then eating it, but just making it clear that it is tasty, exciting, that it's nothing unusual. And we also could do the same thing with adults. I would love to have the city do much more engaging active residents to do public health work throughout the community, including having anybody who has a skill like knowing how to do great vegetarian cooking, offer to teach that at a community center or a recreation center or other places around, so that anybody interested would have the opportunity to learn, to fill in that imagination.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Okay, we've got Alex Padro and Claudia Barragan. Alex?
So when the city's first all-vegetarian fine dining restaurant opened in Shaw back in 2005, I wondered whether or not it could survive, because so many people don't understand that there are alternatives. You don't have to always have protein, with every meal. But the remarkable thing is that everyone that I took to Vegetate, which is the name of the restaurant, was fascinated by the fact that there were plenty of things that were all plant-based, but tasted like food. So education is critical. If we have young people, from their first exposure to different kinds of foods, understand that that vegetarian options are as healthy or even more healthy than what they may be eating at home, and they can help to educate their parents and convince more people to try vegetarian. So it's a matter of trying it and then realizing that you don't need it.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And by the way, Alex, your audio has gone in and out with certain questions, at least to me. I don't know if that's true for others, but if you might, this last answer was very crackly in my ears, so I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but the previous answer was very clear. Last candidate to answer this question, then we'll have a little variant on it for the others, is Claudia Barragan.
Thank you. So I think that we shouldn't just incentivize high-end restaurants, as someone mentioned. I think we really cannot continue to perpetuate inequities in the city and privileges in the city, across the city. I think that more groceries must provide vegetarian-friendly foods in food desert areas and food insecure areas. I live in Ward 5, and actually my neighborhood is a food insecure neighborhood. It's not just east of the river. There's many neighborhoods like that. Second thing I think we should do is adjusting our households to meet dietary needs of friends. That's something as an immigrant, as someone who is not vegan and not a vegetarian has done. And I think that makes our city better. Unlike my other candidates, think a bean burrito is beautiful. I don't think we should look down on bean burritos at all. Pupusas de locro are beautiful. Bolivians, my people, we've been eating potatoes, 250 kinds of potatoes all of our lives. So we are beautiful. Our food isn't ugly. And meat is very expensive. And families like mine who are not wealthy, who are not privileged, we end up becoming vegetarians out of need. That's what we're seeing right now. A lot of these families in COVID, they're eating fruits and vegetables because that's all they can eat. That's all they're being given. So we need to be cognizant about that, and we need to really stop with this privilege in terms of food that we keep hearing in the city. I think then we will be top tier.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much, and I appreciate that. And actually, that leads me to a little bit of transition on this question. You know, Ed Lazere actually previewed a little bit of it, and he also was the one who mentioned. I think I can clarify for him. I think that he did not. He only was meaning to say that he didn't want to serve kids untasty burritos. Is that right, Ed?
Yeah, I think what often happens when people make vegetarian food is they just substitute the meat for something very basic without being thoughtful about making it actually a creative from scratch vegetarian dish. That's
Correct.
what
we appreciate the discussion and your points, Claudia. Absolutely, very well taken about the need and thank you for raising that. Now, what we wanted to shift to on this question was, well, firstly, I myself, since a lot of you mentioned your diets, I am not a vegetarian. I am a meat eater. I always have been, and I enjoy it. However, I have been reducing my meat consumption. I've been trying to, and I've been hoping that there's more options, like many of you were saying. And I remember, as Alex mentioned, that restaurant in Shaw, Vegetate. So since DC is supposed to be this veggie-friendly city, following up on what Ed was saying about schools and the DC Council resolution from 2010, would you support transitioning towards Meatless Mondays, something like Meatless Mondays citywide or through the DC government, and promoting more plant-based proteins in DC institutions, such as schools, prisons, even government events at the DC Council or elsewhere? These proteins are coming up every year, more and more of them, and the more they are, there's demand for them, the cheaper that they will be. And of course, as I mentioned, and has been mentioned in the chat, little factoid, the climate impact of a person's meat consumption is so high that reducing your own individual meat consumption can be even more beneficial to the climate than switching to a hybrid car. I found that very interesting to put it in that comparison. So again, the question to the last few of you, Michangelo Scruggs, Jeanné Lewis, Kathy Henderson, Markus Batchelor, Christina Henderson is, would you support transitioning towards meatless Mondays and promoting more plant-based proteins in DC institutions, school meals, prison meals, even government events and council convenings? And we will start with Michangelo Scruggs.
I would certainly support that as an option, because there are people who, like me, still like meat, and the transition from meat to meatless is pretty difficult, and there are some people who will be vehemently opposed to that. So I would certainly support that as an option, but I wouldn't require it in our institutions as a mandate.
Right, okay. But even if it was just on Mondays, something like that in schools or prisons, etc. But in any case, just to clarify, next up is Jeanné Lewis.
So I think that, like many questions, this is about sequencing. So as a person who does live in a food desert and tries to reduce meat consumption, I mostly eat fish. I'm primarily a pescatarian, but not exclusively. I know that it's sometimes very difficult for me to access healthier food options, even though I am middle class, whether that's food delivery, because not all food delivers here, even though I have a car, you know, making those choices, and my neighborhood is not walkable to get healthy food. So I think it would be a priority to create healthy food options consistently throughout the city and really advance an equity agenda to make sure that those options are available for people to choose before something like this, because some children in particular, their only access to meat is at school, or their only access to significant protein is at school. And also as a woman, I know that not all plant-based proteins are actually good for health. I've investigated this very thoroughly and attempted to transition to some, and have had some adverse health issues. And so while we do have more options available and they are more affordable, they're not necessarily all healthy. And I worry that at scale, it could be very difficult to provide healthy options, especially for young children who need access to protein.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeanné. Kathy Henderson, you're next.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Kathy? Kathy, I could hear you, but I cannot now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Kathy, please
Okay.
proceed.
Great question. Great question. I like a cheeseburger every now and then, but they're not good for you, especially a grilled burger, heterocyclic amines. Really, I would certainly support meatless Mondays, and I would ask the restaurant industry, to make it a city event. I would ask restaurants to put their
Kathy, I
vegetarian
can't
dish,
hear you.
and I would ask our children. You can hear me? Hello?
No, yeah, if you can try to be clearer, if there's a way.
Long story short, I support meatless Mondays. I would ask the restaurant industry to get involved and have a contest to see which is and talking about initially.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, we've got Markus Batchelor, then Christina Henderson.
Sure, no, thank you. Yeah, I'd be in support of initiatives like that. I think it's important that we educate folks as much as possible on alternatives to meat and for sure living healthier and more nutritious lifestyles. I just think to think about this in context of the last question, I think about this in three ways. I think the first is access, right? So until we can have equity and access to nutritious meals, we're still going to have the inequity in health outcomes and those able to be re-educated and reacclimated to an alternative diet. diet. So we've got to do that first and foremost. I also see the second thing as industry as an equity lens. So when we talk about providing nutritious meals and meat alternatives in our communities, we've got to support more access to capital for Black women and other minority-owned businesses who want to provide that, who want to open in Black and brown communities and hire from Black and brown communities. And I think of businesses like eLife and New Vegan who are doing great work, but have not been able to expand their footprint into many communities that need it the most. And then the last thing I would say is education. And I think that's about making sure we have more folks who have access to primary health care, to nutrition classes, are educated on the health benefits of a meatless diet, and then moving folks towards that and giving them the supports they need to do it.
Do you think, Markus, you're on the school board, do you think schools in their school lunches should be meatless on Mondays, for example?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of it, and quite honestly would also be in favor of in-school kitchens again, which I know also provide access to more nutritious and fresh food for our young people as well.
Thank you for taking that question, Markus. Christina Henderson?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I would be supportive of this. I think you start with the sort of the low-hanging fruit, for instance, with government events. We've managed to transition away from having any sort of food or anything like that involves peanuts. I think that we can also, sort of make a transition even further in terms of moving away from protein. I had a friend of mine who had a wedding catered entirely vegetarian, which actually was a very tasty event. But I also think that if we're going to make this transition in terms of educating people around meatless meals, you have to start with the kids. We have programs in our schools like food prints that work in community gardens and then bring those vegetables and things like that into the classroom and help children develop meals and then help them develop their own cookbook that they can take home and work with others. I'd like to see the food prints program expanded, but also not a lot of people realize, but we've spent a lot of money in DC on building out demonstration kitchens at certain schools. And I feel like that's a great opportunity to bring communities in I think Ed was talking a little bit about, how do we help people who want to, possibly show new vegetarian options. I think we can utilize the demonstration kitchens that we already have at DCPS schools. Thank you.
Great. Now, Matt, I think we're done with that question. Max, did you want to take the transition now? Or should we move on to the next question? Okay, here we go.
Yeah, thank you, Kishan. And as I mentioned, the candidates did a great job of preparing some videos. We had these videos queued up, but we couldn't show all of the videos. We didn't have time for that. So here are some of the highlights. And this is candidates weighing in on what their first policy would be related to animals if in DC, if elected.
Hi everybody, this is Mónica Palacio and I'm running to win the at-large seat on the DC Council this November. I'm the first Latina in the city's history to run for the DC Council. I'm a proud doggy owner. My dog's name is Uma. We lovingly call her Uma Luma. The first question I'm answering today is regarding what I would do to afford greater protections for animals in the district. The first thing I think we need to do is pass legislation banning the sale of animal fur, because we know that animals suffer an incredible amount of cruelty when they're used and for the process of selling their fur. Los Angeles has already banned the sale of animal fur, and I think the district needs to immediately move in that direction. Other countries have done this, and it's also important not just for our animals, but for our ecosystem and making sure that we're not housing animals and hurting them just for the purposes of selling their fur.
I believe it's unjust that individuals and families in public housing in DC are denied the right to live with a companion animal. To address this inequity, I would propose legislation to allow pet families to live in DC Housing Authority controlled properties. I've been an advocate for DC animals and their families for the 20 years I've been an ANC commissioner and helped to make 2 of the city's first off-leash dog parks, the Shaw and Bundy dog parks, a reality. I would continue to be an advocate for our animal friends and their humans on the council. Please let me know what your priorities are by contacting me at my website, alexpadro.com.
Hola, my name is Claudia Barragan and this is Bailey.
So I'm an immigrant Latina running for an at-large council seat. During COVID, a feral cat came into our lives. By June, she surprised us with kittens, and I needed access to veterinary services stat. My dog's veterinarian tried to charge me $600 for deworming medicine. After pleading for a discount, he agreed. I will draft and support an expansion of veterinary care services covered in the Animal Education Fund. We need a low-cost pricing scale. I also want to ensure that the fund is used to expand diversity and inclusion in the veterinary field. A veterinarian is one of the whitest jobs in America. In 2019, close to 90% of all veterinarians were white, and only 2.1% of vet techs were Black. We need this bill now. La vida es muy corta para no vivirla feliz entre animales. Please vote for Claudia.
Hi, I'm Chander. One of the first things I would do as a city council member is hit home to me when I was thinking about this question. Our dog Ollie had heart valve disease, and we had to take him to emergency care and had him put to rest. But the cost of that, I realized, was something we were fortunate to be able to afford, but many families could not. So I really believe that we have to provide one of two options to make it easier on families when they face such a tragic time. One, if the vet is willing to cover the cost of it, they should get a tax break for providing that service. Alternatively, the Animal Outreach and Education Fund should be used to cover end-of-life services, so the families who are who are grieving at the loss of really their family member don't have to think about the cost of it, about whether to have a humane end-of-life experience for their pet or not.
My name is Jeanné Lewis, independent candidate for DC City Council at large. When my cat, Makeda, was at the end of her life, I had to take her back and forth to the vet several times. Every day when I was at the Anacostia Animal Clinic, I saw pet owners come and go. Some of them couldn't afford food for their pets. Others couldn't afford more than the basic service. But during this time of crisis, it's critical that pet owners are able to care for their sick pets. And expanding the Animal Education and Outreach Fund beyond spaying and neutering will allow them to do that. It can also create support for vital small businesses in our community. Local veterinary practices like the Anacostia Animal Clinic are critical partners and neighbors and friends in our community. So by expanding the fund, we'll provide extra safety and security to pet owners and their pets, and we'll also be able to help our important small businesses weather this economic crisis.
As your current at-large council member, I have consistently supported legislation that protects our animals and eliminates inhumane policies. I believe that we can do better. I've been in the process of researching legislation that will better protect dogs that don't have families, particularly bully breed dogs. As the pet father of Roscoe, a rescue pit bull pup, 10 years old, I'm particularly sensitive to how these breeds are discriminated against and our lack of protections for them. Also, I've consistently brought rescue animals to parades with me whenever I march in my official capacity or in my campaign to give exposure to pets that don't yet have family, to those who might take them in, and consistently those pets were adopted, which has always been such a joy.
Thank you to all the candidates, and my apologies to the candidates we didn't show. We will be posting all of those. There are many other great videos. Oh my. There are many other great videos that we will be posting to our YouTube channel and website. And to finish things off, we will do rapid fire questions, just a simple yes or no to some policies that we are looking at right now. And Kishan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks. Okay. So the DC Council has several pieces of pending legislation that would support animals. In 15 seconds or less, or in actually a yes, no, as Max mentioned, would you support this legislation? Number one, the Animal Care and Control Omnibus Act. It would be the next big measure for the DC Animal Code. Of the several measures for animal protection, it includes ending the sale of animals from abusive operations like puppy mills, increasing adoption efforts by having pet stores sourced from animal shelters, banning instruments used in dogfighting, and more. If elected, would you reintroduce or co-sponsor this legislation? And
so the
yeah.
order will have Ed Lazere, Franklin Garcia, Claudia Barragan.
Yes.
Ed? Yes.
Yes.
Franklin, yeah. Claudia. Okay. Christina?
Yes.
Monica?
Yes.
Alex Padro?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Jeanné Lewis?
Yes.
Kathy Henderson? Kathy?
Kathy, you can put your answer into the chat if you're having technical difficulties. We want to be flexible with folks due to the challenges around COVID and having to do this live webinar. So
can you hear me?
Can hear you now, yes.
Yes, emphatically yes.
Thank you. Chander Jayaraman.
Glad to support my friend Mary Che, who introduced us in the first place, so yes.
Michangelo Scruggs.
Yes, without question.
Thank you, Dr. Mick. Markus Batchelor.
Yes.
All right, Max, are we on to, which one are we on to now in the interest of time?
Yeah, we'll finish up with one last question, letting you all know that DC Voters for Animals recently issued a survey to the DC animal advocacy community to get a sense of what folks' policy priorities are. And it turned the top priority was concerns around force feeding animals for food production, which is common in the foie gras process. And so if you were elected, would you help pass legislation to end extreme cases of animal abuse in animal farming, such as force feeding animals? Yes or no? Starting with Franklin Garcia.
Yes, yes.
Chander Jayaraman.
Yes, I don't believe in force feeding any animals. It's awful.
Mónica Palacio.
Absolutely yes.
Christina Henderson. Kathy Henderson.
Emphatically yes, it's barbaric.
Alex Padro.
Yes, there are other alternatives to creating those food products that don't necessitate cruelty.
Jeanné Lewis.
Yes, absolutely.
Markus Batchelor.
Yes.
Ed Lazere.
Yes.
Claudia Barragan.
100% yes.
Dr. Mick Scruggs.
Yes.
Okay, that concludes our questions. As you can see, the participants are welcome to weigh in on this same question too. And as you do, we will wrap up by saying just thank you so much to everybody who participated tonight. Claudia, did we miss you for the first question? Okay, and would your answer?
Yes, 100% yes. And also, I have kittens to adopt.
Oh, share it with us on social media.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you. And
I also want to thank everybody for joining and for putting yourself out there and for caring to serve and your community and our city. I really appreciate you all.
So thank you so much. Thank you to our participants. Thank you to our candidates. Thank you to co-moderator Kishan Putta, and really a pleasure to be with you all. We're going to have an endorsement discussion coming up on Sunday. Come join us, weigh in on which candidates were your favorites tonight, and be sure to vote. Make sure you're squared away and ready to vote. It's going to be so important that folks are ready to vote by mail. You know, if it's going to be so much safer to vote by mail in terms of public safety. So please go to DC Board of Elections, DC BOE, to make sure that you're ready to go. Alexis just posted a link to that in the chat, and really a pleasure to be with you all here tonight. My name is Max Broad from DC Voters for Animals, and have a great rest of your night. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Make sure you vote.
Thanks,
Vote
everyone.
early. Vote early.
Put in the boxes.
Exactly. Don't take a chance at the Postal Service.